It's the dead of night. You're on a military red-eye out of Sevastopol, heading southwest towards Niger. Your assignment? Train soldiers loyal to the military junta that seized power in 2023. At least, that's how it was described in your briefing. In a few hours, you'll land at Airbase 201, a sprawling facility in the Sahel that, until recently, hosted American drone operations. The Pentagon spent over $100 million building it. Now it belongs to someone else. Must have been quite the scandal. But then again, maybe not. Africa rarely dominates the headlines back home. No reason to assume it's any different in America. The plane jolts. For a split second, your mind races. Surface-to-air missiles? Mechanical failure? Sabotage? No, just turbulence. Turbulent is perhaps the single best word to describe great power competition in Africa. Mercenaries, debt, special forces, espionage. Different tools, same end. Pulling Africa into their orbit. From Beijing to Brussels, Moscow to Washington, every player knows the game has begun. And in a continent this rich and this contested, the question isn't if influence will be claimed. It's who takes the lion's share and who is left with the scraps. This is not the scramble for Africa, and it isn't a new Cold War. It's a power game, being played by 4 major powers across 54 very different countries. But why? The answer is simple. Africa is resource-rich, strategically located, and ripe for foreign influence. The landmass is an imperial fantasy wearing a continent-sized trench coat. But why now? After the end of the Cold War, Europe and the United States effectively had unmatched influence over most of the continent. But as described in my critically acclaimed video, How Empires Die, the world order is changing. Specifically, it's changing into a multipolar mess, centered on the European Union, Russia, the United States, and China. Coincidentally, these are the same contenders who want to influence Africa. These players may have made their opening moves, but they are all early into their run. Rome wasn't built in a day, and Africa is a hell of a lot bigger than Rome. Now that you understand the stakes, let's look at the players, starting with the undisputed king of the debt trap meta, China. Like the friend you really shouldn't be trading with in Catan, China has a masterful strategy. Offer you a deal you can't refuse, or, a deal that is tempting enough you probably won't. Imagine, for a second, that you governed a country with decaying infrastructure, political instability, and a debt-to-GDP ratio so bad that a payday lender would view you as a liability. Basically, imagine you were the president of the United States, but, in Africa. You are trapped. You can't afford to build the required infrastructure to jumpstart your economy. You look to the West and the American-led world order. If you're lucky, they'll give you money, assuming you're willing to subject yourself to shock doctrine capitalism and open yourself up to international corporations. A steep bargain, and one that rarely works out too well for the countries subjected to it. But who else is going to lend you money? China is. All you need to do is offer up a little collateral. This can take the form of resources, but it can also take the form of infrastructure. For China, this is a win-win. Either you jumpstart your economy and pay them back with interest, or they get something they want. Either way, they make inroads with local governments and make a tidy profit while they're at it. This explains why China has lent over $170 billion to African states since the year 2000. The term debt trap is highly contentious. So before you click off and accuse me of being an American bootlicker in the comments, let's look at a concrete example that proves this framing. Kenya, 2014. The Chinese government helps finance a railway from the port city of Mombasa to the capital of Nairobi. The collateral? The revenue streams and operating infrastructure of the port of Mombasa, the busiest port in East Africa. This is where analysis of China's strategy gets a bit tricky though. It's not abnormal for a lender to want collateral, but for China, taking control of the port would be a last resort. The port was already a key node in the Belt and Road framework, so theoretically, as long as the Kenyan government remained friendly with China, it was already serving a much larger purpose than the revenue alone could offer. Certain China hawks were quick to jump onto the deal, accusing China of trying to take the port from Kenya, but that disguises a more benign reality. If Kenya had defaulted, it is far more likely China would have just restructured the loan. What the collateral and debt gives China is leverage. Something intangible but infinitely more valuable than cash alone. China would rather have an economically developing and friendly node in their global trade network than a bankrupt and hostile one. That remains true even if it takes longer for them to get a repayment on their loan. That isn't to say China has never demanded infrastructure as collateral elsewhere. It has, though rarely. In Africa, it has never done so, and only as a last resort would it even consider it. China is a bit like your friend who went into STEM. They might be intelligent and easy to work with, but you would not want them to be your backup in a bar fight. Who would you want to have as backup in a bar fight? Russia. Strong, chaotic, and adaptable enough to function in the less than stable regions of the continent. Until recently, mercenaries were key to the Russian strategy. This is perhaps best exemplified by the Wagner Group, a mercenary company that until recently operated as a shadow arm of the Russian state. I say until recently, because in 2023, one of their founders, Yevgeny Prigozhin, decided to march on Moscow over disagreements about strategy in Ukraine. Prigozhin's plane crashed 2 months later, and the Wagner Group was dissolved and incorporated into other units and companies. In Africa, most of these troops were integrated into the creatively named Africa Corps, a state-controlled paramilitary which operates across the continent. Russia is most active in the north of the continent and has staked out a serious presence in the Sahel region. China might be willing to build sustainable partnerships with African nations built on investment and mutual development, but Russia has a much simpler proposition. In exchange for resources and access, we will protect you and your regime. Blunt? Yes. Invaluable in a region that has long since suffered from immense instability and foreign interference? Also yes. This is perhaps the biggest weakness of the Russian strategy. Their influence is only guaranteed for as long as someone feels they need protection. And the bad news for Russia is that they aren't the only power running a protection racket in Africa. The European Union, specifically through France, maintains a large military and economic presence on the continent, and they do it with a distinctly imperialistic flair. France has influence over the currencies of several West African countries, and has long since used their French Foreign Legion as an enforcement mechanism in the region. This is beginning to change. From Mali to Burkina Faso, countries are starting to kick out French troops, and French currency controls remain contentious across West Africa. Unlike with Russia and China, the EU sits right across the Mediterranean. This makes it so Europe is very incentivized to intervene in the northern half of the continent. Combine this with the powder keg that is French, Italian, and German imperial legacy, and you have two continents with a lot of baggage maintaining an uneasy relationship. Nationalists across West Africa condemn France's continued presence in the region to this day. France does little to sway them back. Unlike France, most EU countries have abandoned their imperial past. Economic exploitation of the continent still happens, but it's not unique. What is unique is the EU using North Africa as a massive immigration sponge. Basically, the American stay-in-Mexico policy for migrant control, but with a Mediterranean flair. The EU is also a massive provider of foreign aid to Africa. This is not out of the kindness of their hearts, but in an attempt to keep the region stable and open for business. Speaking of open for business, it's big, it's fat, it's America. America's role in Africa is constantly fluctuating as they stumble into a multipolar future one blunder at a time. During the war on terrorism, it was counterterrorism. Before that, it was development. During the Cold War, it was containing communism. There may have been a point between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of World War I, where America had a mostly non-interventionist approach to Africa, but that time has long since ended. In the year of our Lord 2026, the American approach could best be described as confused. Are they still there in a counterterrorism capacity? Yes. Are they still there in an economic development capacity? Yes. Are they still there to contain the influence of other actors? Again, yes, though this time not on ideological grounds. In short, America's Africa policy reads like the doctrine of an empire that does not know it's in decline. Their presence is overstretched, and it feels like they are on the perpetual back foot. They have allies on the continent, but there is pushback from countries that were traditionally in their orbit. They are still the most powerful player on the board, but they have been put into a position where their moves seem almost reactionary as opposed to proactive. While China builds relationships and develops economies in their orbit, and Europe and Russia fight for specific objectives and to maintain specific relationships, America fights for broad control. This strategy works when you are the hegemonic sole superpower. It works less when you're one of the four great powers. Remember Airbase 201? America financed it so they could use it as a drone hub to fight Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The value proposition was the infrastructure, not the relationship. This made it incredibly easy for an insurgent regime to kick them out. There is a growing awareness that America cannot be everywhere at once, and that awareness is dangerous for the United States. Power is fundamentally immaterial. To be powerful is for everyone to believe that you are. If that facade crumbles and people realize your limitations, they can start taking advantage of them. If I had to sum up the American approach concisely, I would say it is a mix of the Russian and the Chinese strategies, with some intelligence and special forces shenanigans thrown in for good measure. Like a teenager's approach to life, America's approach to Africa isn't dumb, it's just directionless. This is the board state as it stands right now. China, a power near parity with the United States, masterfully plays the long game while America is on the back foot. They play to their strengths, and they play well, but their kinetic abilities remain lacking. Russia uses paramilitary forces to exploit specific pressure points and prove value to resource-rich regimes. Their ambitions aren't quite continental, but their presence is vast. The European Union is torn between French imperial nostalgia and the more pragmatic foreign policy priorities of their other member states. The United States is a powerful mess. Strategic goals are either extremely broad in scope or extremely limited. There are broad doctrines, but very little long-term strategy. If they pivot to a more economic approach like China, I think they could be truly dominant. But as it stands, they seem to be constantly reacting as opposed to setting the terms of the game. But what do you think? Will China successfully incorporate a swath of rapidly developing African nations into their global economic empire? Will the United States manage to regain their global hegemonic status, allowing them to claw back dominance on the continent? Will France be forced to fully retreat from the continent, bringing them in line with broader European foreign policy? Let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and if you want to, share. I'm a new channel, and your support means the world to me. Also, I'm considering doing a video on smaller actors in the African theater, like Turkey, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and South Africa. Let me know if you'd be interested in seeing that in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching.